Hi, welcome to this presentation. What we thought we would do is provide some slides around creatine, specifically under the title Creatine Reinvented, sort of a life beyond sports nutrition, muscle and strength. Now, this is a presentation that we gave at VitaFoods recently in Barcelona in, of course, May 2025. And we thought we would share these with more people who were keen to find out a little bit more about, of course, the topic area and what we do here at Nutrition Integrated. So the purpose of the next 15 minutes is just to give you a top line sort of macro view of creatine. Maybe it'll kickstart you into this area and how you might like to get involved. So, with that, the topic sort of introduction is basically just to say that, of course, we're here to help you sort of make sense of the trends. And I suppose there's two aims to this presentation. First is to summarize what the creatine landscape looks like in Europe. We also do know what it looks like in the US, but for the purposes of this presentation, we'll stick to Europe. Otherwise, there's a lot to really talk about. And specifically, what are the category dynamics and what is the scope for future innovation? It's a really interesting area, super vibrant, lots of interest with the broadening of the claims or the benefits of creatine and who, of course, it might be relevant to. As a starting point, I think it's always worth reflecting on the fact that creatine is fundamentally synonymous with sport. When I say sport, I'm probably meaning sports nutrition. What this chart is basically saying is that effectively, if you took a lot of sports nutrition related product categories, so protein, RTM, which is ready to mix whey protein powders, to which we track nearly 1,000 brands, if you took all of those 995 brands, 69% of them will have a creatine. If you took all 986 brands that have a pre-workout powder in Europe, then 69% of them will also have a creatine powder. As you come down, of course, those in the area of just gummies, which is more of a dietary supplement type play, then only 16% of brands with a gummy would have a creatine powder. It's quite an indirect sort of surrogate measure here, but effectively what you're saying is if a brand has a traditional sports nutrition portfolio of products, then creatine is almost certainly within that portfolio. As the brand goes beyond sport and sports nutrition, then creatine is less of a product that typically finds itself or manifests itself into that brand's portfolio. And that's simply because creatine has been synonymous for sports nutrition. And of course, that's around the claims that it is known to be able to make, certainly within Europe, around high intensity exercise. Now, beyond the nutrition and health claims regulation, then of course we know creatine sort of supports muscle and strength and everything to do with that. It's very much sports nutrition, faster, higher, stronger. So that is the background, of course. And when you take that into account and you look at the creatine products on the market, they tend to very much give you a sports nutrition vibe. Now, in terms of the formats that are available, then you tend to find five. There are obviously more, and certainly there are some RTDs appearing, but we'll come to that a little bit later. Then you're seeing here the creatine formats available in powdered versions, capsule versions. There's also tablets there, gummies. You've got chews and you've also got effervescence. Now, the percentages on this chart just reflect the frequency of the formats available. So, of all creatine products, powder represents 70% of that, and sort of capsules, tablets is around about 26%. Gummies, which is the emerging area, is 2.5%, but that's growing rapidly, albeit off a small base. So yes, there's five primary formats for creatine that are widely available. Powder is probably the most versatile one that people can use. It can be added to so many different sort of other areas. You could add it into a smoothie, a drink, or a shake, for example. And so that gives its versatility, which is why, of course, it is the most prevalent available. Beyond that, it's always interesting to think to yourself, how many creatine products do people have in their range? So what we're showing here, both in Europe and in the US and Canada, just for this chart, whether a brand has one creatine product, two creatine products, and three creatine products. Now, what we're talking here is what we would describe as a parent product. So it's not including flavors. So it's not a product with three flavors would count as three. We're talking about distinctly different creatine products within a portfolio. So in some respects, that might be a brand might having a powdered version, and then they also have a capsule version. They would be two distinct products. It could be that they have a monohydrate on its own, unflavored, and they also have creatine, heroed creatine by naming convention, but it might also have HMB in it, and that would be a second creatine product, for example. So what do you need to know here? Then in Europe, actually, almost 56% of brands have two or more creatine products. That's typically done by format, by the way, so it's not overcomplicated. But interesting, in the US, it's much smaller. Only 29% of brands that have a creatine product would have two or more. It's kind of reflecting the simplicity of creatine in some respects, and I think to many interests here, it's difficult or potentially innovation challenge to work out whether creatine should have a range of products available, whether it's really going to be stuck into sort of one space. But they're the stats for you to sort of have a think about. In addition to that, it's worth reflecting on some of the data that we have in much more depth beyond these slides, that the dose of creatine is relatively homogeneous. Of course, it's sort of grounded in science for a long time. In the US, it's more like 5 grams per serve. And in Europe, of course, more aligned to nutrition and health claims regulation, it's 3 grams. Only 3.5 to 4.5% of products will leverage more than one creatine source in any product. So that's creatine monohydrate or maybe hydrochloride being combined. It's very much most of the products choose one single source, of which it's monohydrate, to be that product. So again, relatively straightforward. And as I've said, creatine monohydrate is that preferred source. There are, of course, some exceptions to the rule, and there will be products that combine multiple creatine sources, and then they'll, of course, make a product that builds a whole proposition around it. And here's just some of the examples you can see that we'll track within our database. Now, in terms of branded ingredients, you tend to find that Creapure from Alzchem is the gold standard. You'd be hard pushed for many people to even name a branded creatine beyond that. Now, of course, there are others, but that would be the dominant one. In terms of the prevalence of those beyond Creapure, it's a little frequency or penetration. And to the mainstay, you've got the majority of brands, let's just say sort of 15% of them will be branded, and then 85% will be unbranded. I guess the question is do people value the branded version? And of course, some people do, and for good reason. But for a lot of reasons, creatine monohydrate, unbranded version, of course, for a lot of people will deliver the benefits that they believe they want. But this is good context and benchmarking for the purposes of deciding where creatine innovation could go in the future. Another interesting slide for us is just that flavor is not really a primary dynamic. So, of course, this slide refers more to powders where flavor becomes more of an interest. As tablets have become chewable, and of course you've got effervescence, then flavor is also interesting. What you're seeing here in the Europe and US and Canada is the table split by format. It's also split by geography, and it's basically just saying for any one product, how many flavors do they have per product. So for the majority here, it's very much one. Now, in that instance, that is an unflavored product. So maybe flavor is slightly a red herring there. But what we're trying to say is that flavor, in terms of multiple options, is not really where people have typically gone before. And that's because unflavored creatine, 3 or 5 gram dose, creatine monohydrate in powdered format is very much the mainstay of the category. Now, as you would imagine, that's not only just because of its versatility, but there is some cost efficiencies here, which we do tend to see. This is showing the price per gram of creatine normalized to euros for all products across Europe and their different currencies. And we have done some split out in terms of the branded ingredients. What I will say is that when you have a huge data set like we do, then you tend to see a lot of noise in the pricing, which is why it doesn't always play out as you'd like. When you get into particular brands and subsets, then you will see more trends evolve. But certainly across the board here, you would tend to see that powder is the most cost efficient format for delivery. I think you also need to think about creatine in different formats. So you tend to have creatine only products, but then you also have creatine added to other products. And that's really important to be cognizant of when thinking about the future of creatine innovation. So in this instance, what we have is what is the penetration of creatine in other products? Now, of course, if it's a creatine only product, which is there at the top of this chart, then creatine penetration is 100%. It's a creatine product category. But it is interesting to note that if you look at pre-workouts, creatine is used in 34% of pre-workout powders. And if it's an effervescent, it tends to go in 66% of them. You also find that if it's a protein powder, such as a gainer, to which we are tracking 420, that's what the number in the brackets means, then 41% of those will also include creatine. Why is this important? I guess if you want to sell creatine, you have to be cognizant that consumers can get creatine in other products. And increasingly, we're seeing more and more people add creatine to more products for the purposes of looking for interesting areas of innovation. So where next for creatine? Well, we've kind of labeled this out in a couple of ways. Given that it's come from a sporting context, I think you can frame it like this. Number one, I think creatine, there is always greater scope in performance. So it'll be interesting to look at what that is. And I think particularly a female athlete is where, you'll see more and more uptake, possibly even an aging athlete. You've also got beyond sports performance. So you've very much got creatine around the brain, and that's the new area that's coming out, and particularly at a higher dose. So look at that, but that's challenging in its own way. And you've also got creatine for its use in weight management, and I have a particular lens there on GLP-1 and the journey that any consumer might go through if they're on a GLP-1 related drug, and the significant amount of weight loss and muscle mass that they would lose over a relatively short period of time. And then the third area, which of course is an interesting area, is active nutrition and agelessness or longevity and agelessness. As people look to be more proactive in the future, well, that whole area of brain and weight, interestingly, manifests itself in these new longevity-based brands that exist. And I think you're going to see more and more creatine available in there. In fact, if you look at Brian Johnson's longevity mix, creatine does have a role to play in that formulation. So if I go through a couple of examples of where creatine can go, this is already happening in the market, and what we do is track all these products, and of course we have all of their characteristics. So within the area of sports nutrition, what you're tending to see is creatine still being labeled as a hero in terms of the naming convention, but what you're getting is some tweaks and sort of evolutions in the proposition population. So Applied Nutrition have added a peptide, so Neurotas's sort of pep to strong. So they've gone with a double down approach to sports performance and the whole area around muscle strength, and sort of performance in that space. So they've kind of gone big in the area of the traditional role of creatine. But what they've done is they've combined it with a secondary ingredient to almost find the best supporting actor. You've then got Fresh here. They've added a really nice sort of complementary ingredient in HMB, which takes care of muscle protein breakdown, or that's the evidence and science behind it. So creatine in combination with HMB, which actually could go to a much broader population than sport, is actually a really lovely combination, which we're seeing more and more of, and one for you to watch out for. And then finally, you've got on the right-hand side, and this is the area that people are super interested in, which is creatine for females, particularly for women or for female athletes. The interesting thing here is, does the creatine change for women? Do you need to do anything different? Or is this more just a attitudinally for females? Now, of course, this product itself from Sun Warrior does have additional actives in there supporting creatine that make it more specific to a female or woman. The question would be is, does that need to be happened? Is that what women want? All of these things need to be knotted out, really. But the key area here is there's definitely an uptake within women for the purposes of sport, but of course, the uptake of creatine consumed by women will go into other areas, and there's a lot of evidence, again, gaining around sort of menopause, perimenopause, and that sort of life stage area. You're also seeing creatine, just because of everyone's interest, sort of grow into this creatine plus type scheme. And Warrior in the UK have done a really interesting job at combining creatine with electrolytes, so creatine with collagen, creatine with essential amino acids, and of course creatine with energy. It very much reflects a mashup of macro trends, and it will reflect what other brands will look to do as well. So heroing creatine, adding in another major macro trend, and maybe that's the perfect two-in-one type combination that a consumer might want. You're also going to see more and more of this area around next generation brain health. Now, this Orgain product in itself is very basic. It's creatine monohydrate, 5 grams per serving, as you would expect. Now, that's more of a US-based version. I'll just draw your attention here to the claim for brain health on pack with the little area and the icon. You couldn't really do that in Europe, well, not that I'm aware of anyway, because there'd be no claims to associate to it unless you had a second ingredient added that did have claims. But we're definitely seeing more and more people interested in cognition, cognitive decline, lots of other areas that are in there around the brain. And interestingly, for those that follow the academic research, to which you're best getting from somewhere else, of course, the dose that people are interested in starts to exceed 5 grams, maybe 10 grams, and in some instances, 20 grams. It'll be interesting to see how that manifests itself commercially in terms of how do you deliver that dose? How do you communicate it? Do people want to pay the amount that they would need to pay to consume 10 grams a day? Well, let's see. I'm sure someone will find solutions to that, but this is the area that probably people are most interested in. The question would be is, what difference is this product to just the normal creatine before, and other than the fact it's now creating a brain health claim? So there is some category related challenges that brands need to go through. But as people have become more cognizant of the brain-based benefits, maybe the benefits towards women, of course, aging populations, it's become very much more of a daily essential. I love this creatine infused coffee, just basically because it's following the way that collagen became successful in coffee. It's following the way mushrooms have become successful on top of coffee. And it's kind of like pimping your existing habits and behaviors. So something for you to look out for. And it's a really interesting sort of catch the eye type product about where creatine might go. Of course, people will have some questions about stability in hot drinks. I think it's okay if it's consumed within a few minutes, for example, but that's just something for people to think about. And then the Harlow example is just how a brand is taking creatine, macro trend, collagen, macro trend, electrolytes, macro trend, and done a three-in-one, and then you get everything that you need. Again, it's another example of creatine being at the forefront of some industry mashups. GLP-1 is a significant area for people to be aware of. It's an area that we've done a lot of work on recently in terms of products that are available. Definitely not the experts in the science per se, but definitely on the product and the category landscape. Now, in a sense, New Theory have acted quickly, and they've created a GLP-1 support system in terms of products that cover three areas for nutrient density, micronutrient multivitamin, their probiotic for gut health, and they've also done a protein for muscle loss. Now, in this instance, they're using HMB, which is fantastic, but whilst they don't use creatine, expect creatine to be used more and more in GLP-1 specific products as they emerge on the market. And then finally, I just want to talk about longevity and agelessness. I mean, David Beckham tends to capture the imagination in terms of slides, of course, but IM8, in terms of his brand that he's sort of fronting, is an interesting one in terms of how people are doing a 2.0 type product around the area of greens, or in this instance, reds. Now, they've moved it more into a longevity and agelessness concept. And what you are seeing is a lot of claims around energy and cellular health and cellular energy, something that I know creatine has some grounding in. And I would imagine that you'll start to see a lot of creatine in this space too. Again, I also referred you to the Brian Johnson product earlier. Effectively, what you're seeing is creatine moving into so many more spaces. You're also seeing creatine go beyond the flavor restrictions or inhibitions it's had, which I previously referred to. So in this instance, you've got more flavors for a creatine powder from Core Nutritionals. And then if you take the gummies here, you've got two flavors. Now that's very basic if you take this instance and compare it to protein powders. But what you're definitely finding that whilst 2 and 3 flavors is not a lot, for the purposes of creatine, that is in terms of breaking free from the status quo of flavor that we've seen for so many years. And then finally, you can just innovate a little bit like Pure Sport have to some extent when you see that the biggest sort of brands globally, let's say Optimum Nutrition, still reside in a black tub and do a phenomenal job at providing exactly what the product needs to do. But interestingly, as more people are interested in creatine, maybe those from beyond a sporting context, if you take Pure Sports execution visually of their packaging and the way it's presented, it starts to have a more premium appeal. Now, of course, the challenge is, does a consumer really want to pay for this? I pay a little bit more. I think this nuts out at around about 85p per serving versus 25p for a versatile homogeneous creatine powder in a sort of a tub for a month's supply. So it is almost a threefold more expensive product. But at the same instance, it sort of does reflect maybe the premiumness that creatine is as an ingredient more and more as we reflect on the breadth of the benefits. In terms of summarizing, because of course this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, then I just want to emphasize that creatine is going through this huge sort of reimagination, reinvention. type space, which is typically what the cycle of what ingredients do. And it's doing that basically because it's grounded on great evidence and science. Now, in this instance, creatine is a well-researched ingredient, and it is, of course, huge scope to broaden its appeal in performance and beyond. The role of creatine for the brain and with women and to support consumers on a GLP-1 journey is emerging. And there's a paradigm shift of healthy aging to longevity. Of course, we love the pursuit of agelessness that does offer further opportunity. There'll be innovation around format, definitely thinking about RTDs, inclusive of product experience, thinking about the pure sport example, and that will continue to evolve as consumers demand more accessible products. I think to summarize, it's a really exciting area. It emphasizes a great ingredient with years of fantastic science that's continuing to demonstrate that with, hugely credible academics. The interesting thing for brands is to take something that has been beautifully so successful because of its simplicity and to try and find it in new ways that can engage more consumers with, of course, balancing of the fear of not overcomplicating it. And with that, that's the kind of area that I want to lend or sort of leave you with is that how do you kind of continue to provide products that support the beautiful simplicity of creatine, but at the same time, you don't push people into overcomplicating products that ultimately are more of a category driven thing rather than a consumer need. So with that, I hope that was a great kickstart. If you want to find out more from us at Nutrition Integrated, then we're tracking nearly 2,000 creatine products across all formats. If you need to know everything about price, product characteristics, then please do get in touch. It's an area we're well versed on, and we're interested to help anybody want to take this further. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and keep in touch.